How can a man radiate boundless kindness and yet carry an unceasing shadow of sorrow on his face? The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, held the highest station before God, and yet his contemplation ran deeper than that of any sinner, and his rare laughter was remembered as the most extraordinary of events. Today we look beyond the ordinary descriptions to understand what invisible battle and what unearthly joy were reflected in the face that changed the course of history. Chapter 1. The Face You Cannot Forget. Imagine walking into a room and suddenly realizing that the face of the man across from you reads like an open book. Not because he is weak or incapable of composure, but because his soul is so pure that his body simply cannot conceal it. This is what happened every time the companions found themselves in the presence of Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. Medina, the 7th century, a city of clay and palms and hot air thick with the smell of dust and date groves. People came to him from every corner of the Arabian Peninsula, chieftains, merchants, warriors, the destitute. They traveled for days, endured thirst and heat, just to be near him for a single hour. And when they finally entered the room, the first thing they looked at was his face. Not his clothing, not his standing, not the words he had just spoken. His face. Because it spoke before any words could. When the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, felt anger or joy, it showed on his face immediately because of the purity of his soul. This was not weakness, it was a sign that within him there was nothing hidden, nothing double, nothing that needed to be concealed from the world. But this is precisely where the part of the story that almost no one talks about begins. His anger, his joy, his laughter, his sorrow. Each of these states obeyed laws that his companions studied over years, not from books, but by watching him in person, day after day, year after year. And the longer they watched, the more clearly they understood. Before them was a man whose inner life was governed by something so immense that his every expression carried a meaning far beyond any ordinary human reaction. Take his anger. When he was angry, his cheeks flushed red. Instantly, visibly, unmistakably, so that no one could fail to notice. And yet here is what is astonishing. Anyone who had ever witnessed that anger could have sworn they never once detected anything personal in it. Not the faintest shadow of wounded pride. Not the slightest trace of a desire to prove superiority. Not one drop of that petty, corrosive anger that destroys people from the inside and poisons everything around them. His anger was different, and it was precisely that difference that confounded everyone who tried to understand his nature. And his laughter? It was so rare that the companions would remember each instance and pass it on to one another like something precious. As though they had stumbled upon a natural phenomenon, sudden and blinding, the kind that does not repeat itself twice in the same place. But why? Why did a man described as the very embodiment of kindness and mercy laugh so rarely that each laugh was remembered like lightning in a night sky? And why did the face that shone like a mirror in moments of joy almost always carry a shadow? Light, nearly imperceptible, but constant. The answer to that question will change the way you see everything else. Chapter 2. The Anger That Was Not His Own. There are things that cannot be faked. You can pretend to be calm when everything inside you is boiling. You can wear a mask of indifference when your heart is breaking. You can hide envy, ambition, resentment for years, bury them so deep that you begin to believe they are not there. But when a person grows angry, everything hidden comes to the surface. This is why anger is the most honest mirror that exists. And this is why what the companions witnessed in the moments of Muhammad's anger, peace and blessings be upon him, shook them more deeply than any miracle. Because in that mirror, there was only one thing. Medina during the years of his prophetic mission was a city of constant tension. Negotiations with tribes that were allies today and enemies tomorrow. Betrayals, intrigue. People who came to him with flattery and left with a knife behind their backs. Situations in which any ruler, any chieftain, any person with power and influence would have had every justification to explode, loudly, harshly, publicly, to establish once and for all who was in charge. He never did. Not because he was weak, not because he failed to notice what was happening, but because his anger had no connection to any of it. He grew angry for no reason other than for the sake of the Almighty, seeking to emphasize the importance of upholding his laws. The messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, never expressed anger to demonstrate his own superiority or to bring people into submission. Think about that for a moment. In a world where power was held together by fear, where a chieftain who could not display public and intimidating anger risked losing everything, he chose a different path. A path that from the outside might have looked like weakness, one his enemies surely tried to exploit, and one that produced in people the exact opposite of what was expected. They did not stop fearing him. They began to respect him. But here is the more fascinating part. When anger did come, and it came, because this was a living human being, not a disembodied figure from a book, he did not simply suppress it through an act of will. He did something so practical and so unexpected that it continues to confound people accustomed to thinking of prophets as beings beyond time and beyond the body. When the prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, was overtaken by anger while standing, he sat down immediately. If anger came while he was seated, he would lie down, and the anger would leave him. Not after an hour, not after a long inner struggle. It simply left. The essence of this method is that changing position helps to calm down quickly. A body aroused by anger is in a state of readiness for action, tense, heated, charged. Shifting posture breaks that chain physically before the emotion can grow into a word or a deed that cannot be taken back. He also advised performing ritual ablution because it helps to quiet anger by cooling the body, whose temperature rises with emotional agitation. Cold water on overheated hands. The familiar rhythmic movements of ablution that in themselves return a person to a state of presence. A coolness that comes not only from outside, but from within, because the movement of the body draws the movement of the heart. A walk, a change of surroundings, leaving the space where the anger was born. But here is what is essential to understand, and this changes everything. He did all of this not because he needed it himself. His own anger was directed only toward God, never toward worldly causes. This means that his anger was of a different nature. It required no cooling with cold water, no change of position, because it was not born of wounded self-regard, not born of any desire to defeat, to humiliate, to dominate. He demonstrated these methods for others, for those who would come after, for those whose anger was precisely this, human, burning, blind in its first seconds and devastating in the minutes that follow. And while the companions watched all of this, they came to understand something else, that a man capable of governing anger in this way possessed something within him that they did not. Not simply endurance, not simply discipline, something that made his face in moments of joy an entirely different phenomenon. A phenomenon they spoke of in whispers, because they did not see it every day, and those who did see it could find no words for it, except one comparison, strange, almost impossible, until you understand where it came from. Chapter 3. The Face That Resembled the Moon. There are people in whose presence everything grows brighter, not metaphorically, physically, literally, as though the source of light is not outside, not in the window, not in the lamp, but somewhere inside the person standing before you. And the longer you look, the stronger the feeling that you are not looking at a face, but through it, at something for which ordinary language simply has no adequate word. The companions searched for that word for years, and they found it, again and again, by different people, in different places, at different times in the same comparison. A comparison that at first glance seems like poetic exaggeration, but only until you begin to realize these people were not poets choosing beautiful images. They were warriors, merchants, nomads, people with calloused hands and practical minds, and they said what they saw. When the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, felt joy, his face would light up like the moon on the night of the full moon. Not like the sun, not like fire, like the moon. And in that choice there is not accident, but precision. The sun blinds. You cannot approach it. It burns you if you look directly at it. Fire devours. It is restless. It flickers. It consumes fuel and leaves ash. The moon is different. It does not burn. It illuminates without blinding. It gives enough light to see the road ahead, but not so much that it destroys the darkness in which the soul sometimes needs to think. The full moon is a light you can approach without end, and it will not diminish for having you near. This was what his face was like in moments of joy. But the story grows stranger still. When something brought him joy, his face would begin to shine so brightly that it resembled a perfectly pure mirror in which you could see your own reflection. Stop with that image for a moment. A mirror reflects what stands before it. It adds nothing of its own. It does not distort, does not embellish, does not remove what is inconvenient. It simply returns you to yourself with the same precision with which it receives you. A face compared to a mirror is the face of a person in whom there is nothing murky, nothing that bends the light in its own direction, nothing that stands between him and the world as an obstruction. It is the face of absolute transparency. And this is precisely what brought people to a state they could not explain even to themselves. They came to him with questions, with complaints, with heavy news, and they left as different people. Not because he had said something extraordinary, but because his face, in response to their words, did something that no other face they had ever known could do. It reflected them. With all their pain, all their exhaustion, all their hope, it received all of this and returned it to them in the form of light. But here is where the story becomes truly strange. This light, this astonishing, unforgettable light on his face in moments of joy, was almost never accompanied by what most people consider its natural expression. Do not laugh excessively, for truly, excessive laughter deadens the heart. He almost never laughed. More precisely, he laughed so rarely that each instance was remembered as an exception, an anomaly. Like the lightning you wait for all night, and when it finally flashes, you have only a fraction of a second before the darkness returns. When the prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, laughed, his teeth flashed like lightning in the night, not like sunlight pouring through a window, not like the steady flame of a candle you can grow accustomed to. Lightning, swift, blinding, unpredictable, there and gone before you had grasped what had happened. Most of the time his laughter was limited to a smile. And here is the most important thing to understand. This was not the restraint of propriety, not the effort of a man who would have liked to laugh more freely, but would not permit himself. This was an organic part of his nature, a nature ordered differently from our own, because excessive laughter is not something befitting noble character. And it is precisely for this reason that it was described as a rare phenomenon. Like the momentary flash of lightning, laughter deadens the heart. When it becomes a habit, when it is easy and endless, when it becomes a way of not thinking, not feeling, not confronting what demands seriousness. His laughter was not like that. His laughter was like the crack of thunder that follows lightning, rare, weighty, remembered precisely because behind it stood something real, something that was genuinely worth laughing at. But behind all this light, behind all this joy, behind this mirror-like face, there was always, almost without respite, something else. Something that companions noticed in quiet moments, in the pauses between matters, when no one was asking for anything and no one was in a hurry. A shadow, light, barely perceptible, but constant. A shadow that had a name. Chapter 4. The Shadow That Was Not Grief. There is a difference between a person who is sad and a person who is thinking. At first glance, they look the same. Both are silent. Both are looking at something the others cannot see. Both seem absent, here in body but not in soul. But the distance between them is an abyss, because one looks inward and finds his own pain there, while the other looks further, to a place where personal pain dissolves into something so vast that to call it simply sadness is to say nothing at all. The companions learned to tell the difference over time, and what they saw in the quiet moments, in the pauses between prayers, between meetings, between words, was the second, not grief, not longing, not the exhaustion of a man struggling beneath his burden. It was a concentration so deep that it left a visible shadow on his face. He was constantly in a state of contemplation and a gentle sadness. Not because life had been cruel to him, though it had been at times. Not because he was surrounded by betrayals and difficulties, though these occurred, but because the source of that sadness was something that most people simply do not hold in their minds long enough for it to leave a mark on their face. The consciousness of God's greatness, and thoughts about what awaits people on the day of judgment. This is where the shadow came from. Consider what this means in practice. Medina, an ordinary morning. The market is waking up. The smell of bread, dung, dust, and date syrup. Children running in the street. Somewhere people are arguing over the price of a camel. Somewhere a woman is calling her husband to breakfast. Ordinary life, ordinary noise, ordinary concerns of people who live one day at a time and do not look past the following week. And he, on that same morning, in that same city, amid that same noise, is thinking about what will become of every single one of those people. Not abstractly, not vaguely, but with such precision and such relentlessness that it leaves a trace on his face even when he is smiling. Smiling and thinking. Outwardly, he radiated kindness and warmth, but inwardly his heart was turned toward contemplation, and at times that deep attentiveness showed itself in his noble bearing. This is the key that explains what confounded everyone who tried to understand his nature. How could the same man be the most welcoming person they had ever known, and at the same time carry within himself a constant, unceasing sorrow? How can you smile in a way that makes the person across from you feel like the only person in the room, and simultaneously be thinking about the day of judgment? Because this is not a contradiction. It is a coexistence. What is on the outside belongs to the people. What is on the inside belongs to something greater. And it was precisely this coexistence that made his smile unlike anything they had ever seen. Because behind it there was no emptiness. Behind it there was no desire to be liked, no desire to forget. Behind it stood complete presence and complete awareness, simultaneously. But here is what truly stops you in your tracks. If the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, who possessed the highest station before his Lord, reflected upon this, then how much more ought we to consider our own preparation for this great reckoning? The man with the highest standing of any person who ever walked this earth, the man of whom it is said that he was closer to God than anyone else, the man whose past and future sins had been forgiven. And this man carried on his face the shadow of constant reflection on what lies ahead, not from fear, from awareness. Because the closer you stand to the source of light, the more clearly you see how far the others stand from it. And that clarity gives you no rest, not because you yourself are suffering, but because you see those who cannot see. Aisha, the prophet's wife, peace and blessings be upon him, spent more time at his side than anyone else. She observed him not in official moments, not in public, not during sermons or meetings with tribal leaders. She saw him every day, in the silence, in the ordinary hours, in those intervals of life that form its true fabric. and she spoke of it more precisely than anyone. She said something that at first glance seems like a simple observation, but the longer you hold it in your mind, the more clearly you understand. Behind these words stands something that changes everything you thought you knew about laughter, about joy, and about what it truly means to be alive. Chapter 5. The Testimony of the Woman Who Knew Him Best. There are things that cannot be seen from the outside. You can observe a person in public, at gatherings, in moments of speeches and decisions, in the hours when he knows he is being watched. You can build a detailed picture of him, record his words, memorize his gestures, and still not know the most essential thing about him. Because the most essential thing never happens where people gather to look. It happens in silence, in the ordinary hours, in the pauses. Aisha knew those pauses. She was not at his side as a student, not as a follower who came for wisdom and carried it home. She was there as a person who shares one space day after day, with all its ordinariness, with all the details that never make it into official biographies. She saw him tired and alert, silent and talkative, on the days when revelation felt close, and on the days when he simply lived the way people live. And it was she who said what became one of the most precise testimonies about him to reach us across the centuries. I never saw the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, laugh so fully that his uvula could be seen. He would only smile. One sentence, one observation from a woman who had spent years at his side, but behind it stands something that demands you stop and feel in full. She did not say he never felt joy, did not say he was severe or inaccessible. She said it precisely and concretely. Laughter, that open, loud, all-consuming laughter that most people consider the natural expression of joy, this she never saw. Not once. In all the years she spent beside him, only a smile. And the companions, those who came to him not as a husband, but as a teacher and a leader, saw the same. More than that, they themselves were changed by being near him. Changed so profoundly that their behavior in his presence became unlike anything they were anywhere else. When they were in the presence of the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, they sat so still and so reverently that it was as though birds were perched upon their heads. This is not a metaphor for politeness. This is a description of the physical state of people who found themselves near something so significant that the body itself ceased its unnecessary movement. Birds land only on what is still. Any sudden motion, and they are gone. The companions sat so motionless that birds could have settled on their heads and felt no danger. Not because they had been told to, not because it was a rule of etiquette learned from a manual, but because his presence produced in them something that of itself stilled the restlessness, outward and inward alike. They had personally witnessed his exceptional station and his particular closeness to the Almighty. And this conviction, born not from words but from immediate experience, transformed them. It made them different people in his presence, quieter, more collected, more genuinely themselves than they ever were alone. Even their joy was transformed. Following his example, the companions in his presence expressed happiness only with a soundless smile, avoiding open laughter. Not from fear, from awareness, from the state of a person who understands that he is in the presence of something that calls forth his best self. But here again, the story is not as simple as it appears, because other testimonies exist. Numerous sound hadiths in which it is reported that the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, sometimes laughed so openly that his front teeth became visible. Not merely a smile, laughter, real, visible, unguarded. How can these accounts be reconciled? The answer the sources give is at once simple and remarkable. Each narrator described what he himself had seen, at his own time, under his own circumstances. The one who happened to witness the rare, open laughter remembered and passed it on precisely because it was exceptional, because it was unexpected, because it had lodged itself in memory by virtue of its rarity alone. Lightning is remembered not because it happens often, but because it almost never does. There is also the account that in the early period of his prophetic mission, the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, occasionally permitted himself more open laughter, while in the later period his joy expressed itself primarily through a smile. As though with each passing year of prophethood, with each new revelation, with each deepening understanding of what lies behind this world, the inner attentiveness grew more profound, and the smile that remained on the surface became an ever more precise reflection of what was within. When he did laugh, he would cover his mouth with his hand. That gesture, so small, so specific, a hand raised to cover the mouth in a moment of laughter, is the gesture of a person who, even in those rare seconds of complete joy, does not lose his awareness, who is present in his laughter the way he is present in his prayer, who does not allow joy to seize him so completely that something important within him is interrupted, even for a moment. And here, in this small gesture of a palm shielding a smile, something is concealed that almost no one speaks of openly, something that explains not only his laughter, but his entire life, from the first revelation in the cave of Hira to his final days in Medina. Something the companions felt but struggled to put into words, and which, once it finally receives a name, changes the way you see everything else. Chapter 6. The Smile That Outlasted 14 Centuries. In the end, everything comes down to a single question. Not how he governed his anger, not why his laughter was as rare as lightning, not where the shadow on his face came from in his quiet hours. All of these questions are simply different faces of the same thing. And when you see them all together, in one picture, the answer turns out to be so simple and simultaneously so immense that the first reaction is not exhilaration and not relief. The first reaction is silence, because you suddenly find yourself looking at a man who was completely whole, not in the sense of control, not in the sense of suppression, in the sense of integrity. When there is nothing superfluous within, nothing accidental, nothing pulling in different directions. When every expression, anger, joy, laughter, sorrow, flows from a single source and serves a single direction. This is what the companions saw. This is what stopped their movement in his presence. This is what made the birds, in whose image they described themselves, settle on heads that did not stir. They felt wholeness, for the first time in their lives, in the presence of another human being. And this is precisely what cannot be faked. You can learn not to flush red with anger. You can practice the gesture of a hand shielding a smile. You can sit when you want to stand and lie down when you want to shout. But you cannot make your face shine in moments of joy like the full moon, if there is nothing inside you from which that light comes. You cannot carry on your face a constant, gentle sorrow for the fate of other people, if you think only of yourself. This is not acquired through exercises. It is the result of what a person has been occupied with their entire life. Inwardly, in those very pauses that Aisha observed and spoke of with such precision. But here is where the story makes its final, unexpected turn. Everything discussed across these chapters is not a biography you can close and shelve. It is not the story of a man who lived 14 centuries ago in a city of clay and palms, a story interesting only as an artifact of the past. It is an instruction, direct, concrete, without unnecessary words. When you are angry while standing, sit. While seated, lie down. Perform your ablution. Go for a walk. Do not laugh excessively. Laughter without measure deadens the heart. Smile. It is the finest thing you can give another person without a single word. Carry within you something greater than your own concerns, and it will change how you appear on the outside without any effort on your part. He did all of this and showed it to others, not because he needed these methods himself, but because he knew that those who came after him would need them, would need someone to walk this path first and leave tracks clear enough to be seen across the centuries. Clear enough. Across 14 centuries. And here is what truly takes your breath away. Those methods he demonstrated to his community in the 7th century in a dusty Arabian city, changing the body's position in anger, cooling with water, physical movement as a way of interrupting an emotional reaction. These are precisely what modern neuroscience describes as nervous system regulation. What 21st century psychologists explain through terms like somatic experiencing and pattern interruption. What is considered cutting-edge knowledge about the nature of human emotion. He was speaking of this 1,400 years ago. Not as a theory, not as a hypothesis awaiting verification, but as a practice, demonstrating it with his own body, in real time, to people with calloused hands and practical minds who would not have gone on listening to something that did not work. It worked. They saw it with their own eyes. And here is the last thing that needs to be said. The most astonishing thing in this story is not how rarely he laughed, not how his face shone in moments of joy, not where the shadow of constant contemplation in his eyes came from. The most astonishing thing is all of it together, that a single man could contain within himself simultaneously the moon and the lightning, the smile and the sorrow, anger for the sake of the Almighty, and the complete absence of personal grievance. Full presence with the people around him, and an inner dwelling somewhere incomparably further. Aisha saw this every day, and she never forgot it. We have never seen it at all, but we have her words. I never saw the messenger of God, peace and blessings be upon him, laugh so fully that his uvula could be seen. He would only smile, and that smile, the very one, soundless, illuminating his face like the moon at its fullest, has reached us. Across 14 centuries, across thousands of pages, through the voices of people who saw it and could not forget it. It has reached us, and it still does something to those who pause long enough to feel it. This is the answer to the question with which everything began. Why the face that was seen only once cannot be forgotten.